This recording was produced by Oregon Trail Baptist Church. If you'd like to get more recordings, or to leave your feedback, please visit us at www.otbchurch.com or write us at P.O. Box 298, Guernsey, Wyoming 82214. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope that today's recording will not just challenge your thinking, but will transform your life.
All right, let's get started this morning. We are on the Ten Commandments, so let's get started with Exodus 20.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son nor thy daughter, thy manservant nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Exodus 20 verses 3 through 17.
All right, so I believe we left off with the page 5, Wisdom Literature and the Psalms. Is that where we left off with the command of adultery? Because we talked about it in the law, and then I think that's where we left off. So adultery, number 1 here under Wisdom Literature and Psalms, bottom of page 5. Adultery incites the vengeance of a jealous husband. So in Proverbs, we read in Proverbs 6, to keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman, lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. For by the means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom, and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals, and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth in to his neighbour's wife, whosoever toucheth her, shall not be innocent. Men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry. But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore will he not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts. Sorry, hold on a second. So we have, actually throughout Proverbs, a strange woman is pictured as not necessarily an adulteress in every case, but she's trying to get the man to stumble in many ways. And so adultery or whatever would lead into that. In this passage specifically so. But what does it say about the husband or man who is offended? The one who his wife has gone astray. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how much you're willing to pay to try to make it back. You might never satisfy. There's just no repayment for that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, in some ways, it's like murder. If you kill someone's family member, you can feel sorry for what you've done, but can you bring the life back? And adultery is the same way. You can never take that back. You can never undo what's been done. So it's describing the nature of the offended party and how sometimes it's irreconcilable. And from this point of view, if adultery happens with a marriage, how often is the spouse willing to move on? It's very rare. And understandably so. I mean, you've been violated against. It's painful. It hurts. You've been betrayed to the deepest level. So it's very difficult for a spouse to get over that crime. Job describes adultery, number 2 here, as just a heinous crime. He says in chapter 30, verse 11, "For this is a heinous crime, yea, it is iniquity to be punished by judges." Okay. He also makes note in a previous chapter that adulterers like to use stealth. Job 24:15, "The eye of an adulterer waiteth for the twilight, saying, No eye shall see me, and disguiseth his face." So again, there's deceitfulness here. There's trickery. There's waiting for the cloak of darkness to do what you're going to do. Number 4 here. Harden their own hearts. In Proverbs 30, it's describing this, and it says, "Thus, or such is the way of the adulterous woman. She eateth and wipeth her mouth, and saith, I have done no wickedness." There is a hardening of the heart that happens. I can't remember. This is not a story I enjoy, but when I was working at a hotel, unfortunately, hotels can be a safe haven for those who want to be promiscuous. How's that? Because they can lock the door, and technically the people at the hotel have no business, no right to know what's going on behind closed doors. And I remember coming into work one day, and my coworkers were chuckling about something, and what they described was a man who, from everything they were looking at, they thought it was a prostitute situation. And they described him as him-hawing, and he went in all happy, but came out with his head down, him-hawing, and kind of, whereas she was like, yeah, whatever, light a cigarette and give me, she was just cool, calm, and collected about the whole thing. And they found it funny. I found it sad, but I think that describes what this verse is talking about, where you get involved in that lifestyle, and your heart is so hardened you don't care. You become desensitized. Even the most precious things to you, whether your children or your family, all those connections you become hardened to those. And even the people who want to help you the most and do what's best for you and to advise you and counsel you and help you to do what's right, you harden yourself and cut yourself off from those who are there and your support mechanism. So that's in Proverbs 30:20, where it describes that, how she just wipes her mouth, says, I've done no wickedness. And when I read that, I can't help but thinking of the story that got relayed to me at the hotel while I was working there, because that's whoever this lady was. And maybe my coworkers got the whole thing just dead wrong. Maybe there was something else going on. I don't know. But there is a truth there that the adulteress, especially a repeat offender, I've done no wrong. I'm good. I'm fine. The prophets. I guess comments or questions before we move into the prophets. Yeah.
I just noticed that now the guy is included.
Yes, and there is a development there of the guy being right. Right. So there's an element where it's a very complicated view.
Well, when you don't follow God's ways, life gets
Yes. And that's where, adulterous situations, the children really suffer the most. If there's fruit of that, the children are the ones who suffer the most. All right, so in the prophets, describes when adultery prevails in a land so that even the prophets and priests know no restraint, that land becomes like Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so we have here a description of Sodom and Gomorrah as being filled with adultery. I find it interesting. A modern debate today, which really shouldn't be a debate, is on the homosexuality issue. And there's a passage in Ezekiel that lumps Sodom and Gomorrah's sin with not taking care of the poor and widows. So the homosexuals today who want to be Christian and homosexual and claim that it's sin, they take that passage and see this Sodom and Gomorrah had nothing to do with sexual sin and adultery or homosexuality. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with they weren't taking care of the poor. They were despising the poor. So that's all that it was in Sodom and Gomorrah. But then it's like, wait a minute here. We have in the prophets them describing when the land is filled with adultery, they become like Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like you missed a point. Ezekiel was picking up on another sin that was maybe a root sin of greed and selfishness and living for their own desires. He's picking up on that. But modern interpreters, or not even interpreters, modern people who want to take a certain position will find a text like what's in Ezekiel, use it as a proof text, but they miss the rest of Scripture. So we have to be careful and balance our approach here. But there's an equating when the land becomes filled with adultery, it's like Sodom and Gomorrah. Jeremiah 23:10, there we read, "For the land is full of adulterers, for because of swearing the land mourneth. The pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up, their course is evil, and there's no force, and their force is not right." Verse 11, "For both prophet and priest are profane. Yea, in my house I have found their wickedness, saith the Lord. Wherefore their way shall be unto them as slippery ways in the darkness. They shall be driven on and fall therein. For I will bring evil upon them, even the year of their visitation, saith the Lord." It's interesting here, it's connecting the prophet and priest in. Why would that be important or significant that Jeremiah is lumping in the prophets and the priest with this sin? The question was, why was it significant that Jeremiah is lumping in prophets and priests with this sin of adultery?
Because anybody should be the example. They should.
Okay. They were the prophets were the spokesmen for God. They were to speak on God's behalf, and they're involved in adultery. The priests are the ones who are going to God on the people's behalf, and they're involved in adultery. You may remember the story of Samuel. It begins with Eli and his two sons at the temple. or tabernacle at that point. And his sons Hophni and Phinehas were committing adultery with the women that came to the temple. And they had wives of their own. They were just rampant sin, and the land of Israel knew about it. And they brought it to Eli's attention. Eli chides them for it, but never really stops it. So that is a very real problem. What does the news do today when a preacher falls in immorality? They blow it out of the water, don't they? Okay. The news doesn't hide it, but no, but often, they try to hide it and cover it, right? And then once the news, yes, yeah, yep, and it becomes a scandal, and it becomes a caricature where almost all religious leaders become targets. That might be a term where Western movies do this a lot, where the preacher's usually a bad guy. You ever notice that? A lot in Westerns, the preacher, he's the goody tissues, but behind the scenes, he's a bad guy. Okay, so. Yeah. So, yeah. So, it's a character, but it's, if these are the people who should be the most spiritual, if we can make them look, and sometimes they are, if we can demean them, then we can justify ourselves in a certain aspect. So that's part of what's going on here. The prophet and priest is highlighting even those who should be living godly, even those who should be the examples and who should be encouraging others to do so, even they are flawed and even they are living in ongoing sin. Verse 13 of Jeremiah goes on, "And I have seen the folly in the prophets of Samaria. They prophesied in Baal, and caused my people Israel to err. I have seen also in the prophets of Jerusalem a horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen also the hands of evildoers, that none doth return from his wickedness. They are all of them unto me as Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts concerning the prophets, Behold, I will feed them with wormwood, and make them drink the water of gall. For from the prophets of Jerusalem is profaneness gone forth into all the land." So again, just this ongoing, these are the leaders, these are the ones who should be living righteously, and they're not. Jeremiah 29 carries on a similar theme. It says, "Because they have committed villainy in Israel, they have committed adultery with their neighbors' wives, and have spoken lying words in my name, which I have not commanded them. Even I know, am a witness, saith the Lord." And also here, there's several verses with this, so I didn't put them in the handout, but Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea all use adultery as a metaphor for idolatry. Now, this is actually something that develops within the prophets, is the concept that God is Israel's husband. So Israel is a symbolic of a wife. God is the husband who takes care of the wife. God has a relationship. And so when Israel goes after other gods, when they serve idols, when they worship others, they're turning their back, and it's spiritual adultery against God. That theme picks up in the prophets. The prophets take that and run with it. And actually that gets into the book of James. James picks that theme up and uses that as well. So, comments or questions before we move on? All right, New Testament reflection. Okay. The New Testament, top of page 8, assumes the Old Testament's perspective on adultery. It is wrong and punishable by stoning. As in the Old Testament, the New Testament places great value on fidelity in marriage. So, Gospels. Here we have the ministry of Christ, of course. Adultery comes from the heart. Matthew 15:19. "For out of the heart proceedeth evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, thefts, false witness, blasphemies." This fits with the theme that Christ we'll get to it, but Christ is looking more at the root issue of these sins than these sins themselves. The Ten Commandments, what would be the root issue of all the Ten Commandments? Okay, remember we boiled them down to two things? Well, okay, yeah, one, we're supposed to love God and we're supposed to love our neighbor, right? Adultery breaks both of those. Because in not loving God, you're not loving, or you're not honoring the marriage that God has established, the union, that institution of marriage, but you're also defrauding the husband or the other spouse in that you're breaking that human relationship. You are causing harm to that person as well. So the heart of the issue is more where the New Testament focuses. Not that the external is not a problem, it's just getting to the heart of the issue. Number 2 here, Jesus included lustful looks as adultery. In the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, he said, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her in his heart. In his heart. And if thine right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. It hath been said, Whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery." So, Christ gets to the heart of the issue here, but he's talking about lustful looks. Now, this hits our entire industry of pornography, where today, years ago before the internet, it was mostly magazines and stuff like that. But with the internet, people can access it from anywhere, on a phone, on a tablet, on a computer. It's destroying our culture in many ways. And so here, Christ is saying the lustful look of a man, that's a problem. That's the root of the sin. You don't start in the adulterous relationship unless you let your mind wander there. Unless you let your mind dwell there and follow what you see. And there's times you have to turn your eye away. There's times at the store you have to look at the floor or look at the ceiling or look at something else. You find something else because we're in a culture this is saturating. And I think we need to be careful not to think that the New Testament was a time when this wasn't a problem. Pompeii, you may be familiar with Pompeii. It was one of the cities destroyed with ash when a volcano erupted. They started excavation in Pompeii in about, I want to say, I can't remember. It might have been the late 1800s. It might have been even 1950 or 1960. And they started finding stuff that was so disturbing at Pompeii that they stopped the excavation. They just stopped it. It was so disturbing, they stopped it. Well, more modern archaeologists and researchers have gone back. They've done the digging up. And they found the Roman culture there incredibly perverse, incredibly wicked. And as they are uncovering this, there's the thought that, well, as we're uncovering this is a Roman city, or this is a Roman province, an area that was covered in ash. The Roman Empire, once Constantine came to power, there was a whitewashing and kind of a suppressing of some of the evils. And as Constantine, yes, Christian, yes, I think so to some degree. We'll leave that for a discussion of another day. But he would try to put down all the sins in the society. But Pompeii never had that whitewash effect, the never painting over the images, the never putting mortar over certain stones and things. They didn't have that because the whole city was covered in ash. So they look into archaeology and they say, well, this city didn't have time to change. This is pretty well how it was preserved from the time the volcano erupted. It was a very disgusting society. Some have noted the price of a prostitute was about the price of a loaf of bread in Pompeii. Now, I don't know how they figure that, but this is also the culture that the New Testament church was in. Part of the what they would do to Christians as torture was they would force them into basically sex service or prostitution of some sort. You forced things so it would be demeaning to them. They knew it dishonored their faith. So I say all that because we can get the idea that everything is so bad today. How can we survive? How can we hold the fort? How can we do what's right? Christianity has thrived under wicked and corrupt and evil cultures. The culture does not demand that we capitulate. It doesn't demand that we fail. It actually is something that ongoing evil will be there, but we can have victory through it. And so in Christ's day, living in Jerusalem in Roman times, sure, it may not have been as bad as Pompeii. Surely the Roman Empire as a whole was wicked, and his words are still good for us today. Number 3, Jesus considered it adultery for either a divorced man or a divorced woman to marry again. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. Mark 10 and Luke 16 repeat that sentiment. Number 4, Jesus calls the Pharisees and those who do not believe his message adulterers. So he's picking up the prophetic element here where, at least I think so, I guess he could have had inside knowledge, but I don't think that's what he's saying. In Matthew 12 here, it says, but he answered and said unto them, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. So it's that figurative use here of, you're looking for a sign. You've asked me for a sign. And yet Christ over and over was working miracles, was claiming to be God, doing the things that proved he was God, and yet they always wanted another sign, another indication. And he cites that 2 or 3 times. Let's see. Mark 8:38 at the bottom of page 9. Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. All right, on into the epistles. In the general epistles, Paul has a lot to say on it, and I was running out of space in the lesson. I'm sorry. But in the general epistles, Peter describes the false prophets as having eyes full of adultery. In 2 Peter 2:14, having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, an heart they have exercised with covetous practices, cursed children. So here, he's describing all sorts of sins together, but he's saying they have eyes full of adultery. Now, what does that mean? To have eyes full of adultery.
They see it, they don't do anything about it.
Okay, yeah, they're seeing it. They might not be doing anything about it. I wonder also if it's on the flip, and I haven't done a lot of research on this, but they're looking and longing for it. Does that make sense? Like they're looking, you set your heart on something, you think about something long enough, once the opportunity avails, you're going to bite the hook. You know what I'm saying? So it could go both ways. I'm not 100% sure.
Well, it says covetous right here.
Right. Yes, they were covetous. But Peter is also dealing a lot with false teachers. What did false teachers want? They wanted fame. They wanted a name. They wanted recognition. They wanted credit. That is what we talked a little bit ago about preachers or religious leaders who fall. But that's one of the things. There's a pride element where now you have people who are listening to you. You become special. You become someone they look up to. You also become very susceptible. This is also incredibly. You see this a lot with even youth pastors, young girls who they admire their youth pastor as a spiritual leader, look up to him, and yet if they're not careful, and if he's not careful, relationships can begin that should never have begun. And
Because there's an admiration there.
Yes.
Leader, which is perfectly normal and natural, but it can become more.
Yeah.
You can become infatuated.
I didn't realize this till later in life, but that had happened with, I don't even know the guy's name, a youth pastor in the church we were in when I was probably Andrew's age or so. And the bad thing was my brother and I, the babysitter, the young lady, I don't know her name either, she was supposed to be watching my brother and I, and the youth pastor was picking her up, and so she would take us along with, and we weren't supposed to tell mom and dad. You know, sometimes when you need a chaperone, little minds and little mouths who don't know what they should or shouldn't say are the best because they don't know enough when to shut up. And so when mom and dad started hearing about you bed, you know, and I don't remember much of the details, but the whole thing got blown out of the water. You know, I don't mean that in the sense that it was it got uncovered, not that it was made a big deal out of. That wasn't a big, was a big deal. But again, I don't remember the names. I don't remember any of that. I remember distinctly the babysitter putting us in bed and saying, "Shh, and tell your parents you guys have been in bed the whole time. You know, we don't tell them we went anywhere." So that type of stuff happens, and it often can happen because there's someone like these false teachers. They are taking credit. They're in a position with perceived power, and there is a draw and attraction there that can be good or evil. It's good to follow your leader. It is good to check with Scripture and to be as the Bereans and study to see if those things are so. But here it's going too far and in an inappropriate way. James calls those who are friends with the world adulterers. He says in chapter 4, verse 4, "Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God." So you can't love both. And again, this is going back to the metaphorical or the use of idolatry, but James is taking it beyond just idolatry. And if you love this world and its system, you're putting yourself at enmity or in opposition to God. So as we close out, by way of application, adultery first and foremost breaks the covenant bond of the family unit. And remember, the whole Ten Commandments is started off as a covenant bond with God, and this is breaking a covenant bond with the family unit. Adultery begins in the mind, and believers must guard their hearts. Your thoughts, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. What we allow ourselves to dwell on and think on will eventually act out. Now, I want to be careful here. If a bad thought or an evil thought enters your mind, is that sin? You're shaking your head no. Why?
Because it enters your mind and it's active.
Okay.
It's when you allow it to stay there.
We read of Peter, and the devil is able to input into his mind even wrong thoughts, where he being influenced by the devil said, "No, Christ, you're not going to die. No, none of that's going to happen." Now, the devil can present your mind, and not necessarily the devil, it could be any of his minions doing his dirty deeds, all right? He can present your mind with evil. The world can present your mind with evil. Can you live through this life and perfectly protect yourself from every evil influence? No, not if you want to be profitable in any sense. Where the sin comes in is not when you've been exposed to something that's wrong. Where the sin comes in is when you take it and dwell on it. And you allow your mind to continually roll that footage over and over, or to think that thought. This happens with bitterness, where we take one thought and we roll it over and we roll it over, instead of saying, well, maybe that person did something wrong, but it's not worth it. I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to move on. Instead, we roll it over. That's where the sin comes in. So the presentation of a thought to our mind, that's not where the sin lies. The sin lies when we take it up and dwell on it and think on it. Now, on the flip side of that, we can put ourselves in situations where we're getting lots of those thoughts being presented to our minds. Whether in the media we consume, whether in books, or whether in magazines, or whatever it be, we're living in a culture that's constantly trying to bring this stuff to our minds. So there's a level where we need to guard against that, so we don't dwell on those things. However, we can't keep it all out. Okay? I know this week you plan to go to the grocery store, I would assume, at some point, and there's probably something there you shouldn't see. But it doesn't mean you have to sit there and stare at it, and it doesn't mean you have to think about it. So, it begins with the mind, and so we must guard our hearts. Adultery can be both literal and figurative. We must also be careful to be faithful to our relationship with God. Yes, the command against adultery is a very literal command. But that literal command gets used in a pictorial way of our relationship with God. And is He first and foremost in our life? Or have we let other things steal the attention that is deserved to Him? So, thoughts or questions before we close out here this morning? Yeah.
With the guarding our hearts, not only do we have to, in essence, kick it out of our mind, we have to replace it. Often replacing it is much better, because then it's easier to keep it out.
Okay, so that's...
Kind of like
Okay, so right now, the last thing, don't think anything about a purple elephant. Don't think about a purple elephant. A purple elephant. Don't think, don't picture, don't do anything with a purple elephant. What are you all thinking of? A pink elephant. Okay, now, Dennis, if you are thinking of a pink elephant, you did something there that was very effective. You picked something else. He took away purple and substituted it with something else. The same is true with wrong thoughts. It's not enough to say, I'm not going to think about this, I'm not going to think about this. Because in saying, I'm not going to think about it, or in thinking, I'm not going to think about it, what are you doing? You're thinking about it. So you have to get out the bad, but you have to fill it with something good. Dennis's case is he picked pink elephants. So, but that's he substituted, okay? Now, Paul says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. The reason many people live a miserable existence is because all they can dwell on is the problems of life. The problems at work, the problems at home, the problems at school, the problems here, the problems there. And if they'd stop that and replace it with counting their blessings, their whole outlook would change. So that was a good point on the end there. Yeah. Replace the thinking. Don't just try to think, I'm going to stop thinking about this. So, comments or questions before we close out? Once, going twice. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. And Lord, although adultery, as Job describes, is a very heinous crime, Lord, would we see the spiritual adultery also in the same way? Would you open for us just a sensitivity to your word and to you, and Lord, would we live close to you, honoring you in every way possible. And Lord, I pray for our nation as a whole, whereas this sin of adultery seems to thrive and is rampant. It's destroying homes and families and leaving children damaged and hurt in the wake of it. Lord, I ask that you would do a work in our nation. Would we as believers be able to minister to those who have been affected and hurt and damaged and involved in this sin? But Lord, would even more so you give us a heart to live close to you? Would we not, as James describes, love the world, but would we love you instead? And would we be close and personal in our relationship with you? I ask this in your Son's name. Amen.